All right, so today we're going to talk about part one of Existentialism as a Humanism, which is a foundational work when thinking about the meaning of existentialism and how it can be communicated to a broad audience. So Sartre's work, Existentialism as a Humanism, was basically his explanation of what existentialism is at a conference, because there have been so many misunderstandings about it. People are confused, there's a lot of haters from multiple sides, and so Sartre is basically trying to set it right and say, you know what, this is what existentialism is, and you need to know this and you need to understand it. So he is basically defending existentialism from all of these false charges that have been brought against it. On one side, you have the Christians who are critiquing existentialism. On the other side, you have the communists who are critiquing existentialism. And they typically don't agree with things, but apparently they both are haters when it comes to existentialism. So the Christians are basically saying that existentialism is focusing on what's despicable about humanity. It's basically conveying that, we have no kind of destiny, and they don't like that. They are saying that we can't just live life without hope, and that's what existentialism is saying. So the Christians are basically saying that existentialism focuses on what's too despicable and what's negative about humanity. The communists, on the other hand, are basically saying existentialism is focusing on the individual too much. It's too bourgeois to consider our meaning and purpose in life. The workers of the world don't have time to think about this, right? They're too busy working, as we talked about with the Marxism unit. So the communists are saying, well, this is too bourgeois, this is too individualistic, they're not focusing on human solidarity, and so you basically have this disagreement and this clash with existentialism. And so Sartre is basically saying, all of you don't understand what existentialism is. Some people are appropriating it and thinking that it's a cool thing to do, right? Oh, I'm going to be, we're black and be an existentialist, but this is what existentialism is. So existentialism at its heart is basically affirming that every truth and every action imply an environment and human subjectivity. So subjectivity is at the core of existentialism. Subjectivity is basically this notion that we have free will and we define ourselves. No one else, just us. So we aren't born a certain way. We don't have a human nature. There isn't a God or gods determining anything. It's just us that's determining our destiny, our purpose, the I, the self. So there are different kinds of existentialists. You can be a Christian existentialist. You can be a Buddhist existentialist. You can be an atheistic existentialist. And so Sartre is basically saying that he is part of the atheist camp of existentialism. And so both the Christians and the atheists, though, agree that existentialism offers choice. So essentially, they both believe that existence precedes essence, meaning that we are thrown into the world, we're born, we materialize, and it's only after we make choices and act that we define who we are. So it's not as if we're born with a specific destiny or nature. It's our choices and our actions, it's our subjectivity that defines who we are and who we become. So this is obviously a little dismantling because we perhaps sometimes want to look to a God or look to a sacred text or look to our parents or look to a human nature and say, well, you know what, this is how I am. I can't do anything about it. But Sartre is essentially saying we can't do that. And that is scary. But at the same time, it is liberating. So we first exist, we're thrown into the world, we don't know why we're here, but it's on us to make our purpose, to define who we are. And so this notion of subjectivity is something that only belongs to human beings. So a table would not have subjectivity because it's not human. It doesn't have consciousness. It doesn't have free will. So this idea of subjectivity comes from the fact that human beings have consciousness and free will. And so according to Sartre and many existentialists, other objects and other beings don't have this kind of free will. So therefore, they don't define themselves. And this is why Sartre uses the example of the paper knife, because you have a creator for the paper knife who creates this object and creates this object with the purpose of what the object will do. So that is typically how people think of human beings. People think that there's a God and God created human beings with this purpose in mind. Think back to Descartes. But for human beings, there is, well, specifically for the atheistic existentialist, there is no God. So we're just thrown here, and then we have to figure out who we are. For the Christian existentialists, they believe in a God, but they believe that God instilled us with free will. So we don't necessarily have a purpose. We still have to figure that out. And so this notion of subjectivity then is at the heart and the core of existentialism. And so many people say, well, you know what? I didn't choose to exist in the first place, so why do I have to make all of these choices? Why can't I just ignore subjectivity and just not choose? Why can't I just be indecisive, right? I can be very indecisive, and sometimes I don't want to make a choice. But the thing is, we always have to make a choice. Everything we do, every interpretation we have in life is making a choice. So we can't escape it. Choice is inevitable. Subjectivity is inevitable. So it's kind of a curse and it's a blessing, because this means we get to define who we are. We can't blame anyone for how we turn out. It's all on us. But at the same time, that's exciting, right? We don't have to define ourselves within this confining notion of who we can be, because it's up to us who we can be. And so this notion of human subjectivity is not something that's solely individualistic. So this is where Sartre was saying, you know what, the communists misunderstood existentialism, because this isn't just an individualistic notion of subjectivity that, oh, it's just me and my free will and I get to define who I am and I don't have to care about anyone else. No, that's definitely not what the Sartrean camp of existentialists is saying. We are defining ourselves, but we are defining ourselves in a world amongst other people. So we have to define ourselves in relation to other people. We are making choices in a specific environment amongst a human species. So when we are making a choice, not only are we choosing for ourselves, we are also choosing for humanity. We can't ignore that. How are we choosing for humanity? Because when we make a choice about something, we are affirming the value of that choice to everyone, because we belong to this universal species. We are interconnected. Our actions impact other people. So if I choose to become a philosophy professor, I am affirming to the rest of the world that philosophy is valuable and that teaching is valuable, and that I want people to be exposed to philosophy. And I don't expect everyone to become a philosopher, but I do think it's important for everyone to experience philosophy. And Sartre uses the example of marriage and monogamy. Many people choose to get married, and specifically if they are in a monogamous marriage, they are affirming the value of monogamy to the rest of humanity. So it's not as if we just randomly decided to do things. We as human beings made a choice to do something, and when we make that choice, we are creating ourselves and the rest of humanity in the image of the rest of humanity. So we can't ignore how our actions impact other people. So, for example, what I choose to teach in my philosophy courses is affirming the value of those philosophers to the rest of humanity. And that is how subjectivity works. It's not just an individual process. It's something that impacts everyone. And so this is where the notion of responsibility comes in, which is intense to think about, because not only are we responsible for ourselves, we are responsible for the rest of humanity, and that is absolutely terrifying. We don't want to feel that responsibility, but in fact we are. So not only are we responsible for ourselves, we are responsible for everyone else. And so many of us want to ignore this responsibility. So this is where Sartre gets into the implications of our responsibility, and I will talk about that in the next video, right? What happens when we realize, oh my gosh, I am responsible, not just for myself, but for everyone else.